Welcome back to some more geometry. Today we're talking about volumes of cylinders, cones, and spheres. Let's talk about our cylinders first. So very similar to prisms, it has two bases and it has a lateral side. But what makes them different is, unlike the prisms, these sides are rounded. The edges are rounded here. But the formula is still the same. Volume equals area of the base times the height. But what's great about cylinder is that the base is always going to be the same. There's always going to be a circle. So that's why we just input the formula pi radius square, that's how you find the area of a circle. So for our particular problem right here, we will do pi 4 square times our height 8. Now another thing about the height, let's talk about the height. The height has to be perpendicular to both the bases. So we look at the perpendicular distance between two bases. I will see as an example here. Anyways, look at this problem. We will go ahead and square our radius first. So we got pi times 16 times 8. And then you multiply that, you get 128 pi. And this is in units cubed because we're looking at volume. Let's look at this next one right here. So on this particular problem, as you can see, this is a slanted cylinder. But again, we're looking at the perpendicular distance between the two bases. So let's say they had a number right here. We wouldn't care about this number because the side don't matter. It's the perpendicular distance. That's the true height here. So when doing this formula right here, we would do pi 5 square times 15. You go ahead and square your 5. You get pi times 25 times 15. We multiply those two, 15, you get 375 pi. Now, if your answer was in pi form, let's say leave it in pi form, this is what you do. You leave it like that. But in case they tell you to round it, you go ahead and multiply it. And I know for sure in the assignment, it does tell you to round a couple of these. So we'll multiply 375 times pi. We get 1178.1 because it's 0.9. So it's 0.1. And it's still units cubed. And this particular one is centimeters cubed because they tell us we're in centimeters here. So that's cylinders, very similar to that of a prism. So when we looked at last week, so we were looking at 11.6, we used the same formula, it's just more detail. So kind of continuing that pattern, a cone is basically like a cylinder. The only difference is it goes to a point. So when we look at this, we say like, oh, well, it still has the same height and it has the same circumference here. Oh, all right, sorry. Still has the same base. So the way we change it, though, is because this cone, when looking at space it takes up, it only takes up a third of the amount of space that the cylinder does because it's only going to a point. So there's all this emptiness. So we kind of use the same formula, area of the base times the height, but we're going to divide that by 3 because this is the third of the amount of space it takes up. So look at our example here. We would do pi times 5 squared times the height of 10 all over 3. We square our radius first. We got pi times 25 times 10 over 3, and we multiply that. We get 250 pi over 3. Again, if we're leaving this in pi form, this will be our final answer here. But if we're going to go ahead and round that, let's go ahead and round that off. So we'll multiply 250 times pi and then divide by 3. You get 261.8, again, units cubed, because we're in cubics here. Let's try another cone. So try this one on your own and then come back. Hopefully, you set it up the same. Pi radius square times height. Now, there's two heights here. Which height are we using? Are we using the 3 or the 5? If you put 3 down, you're correct. Because, again, that's our altitude height. The height inside the cone, that's for volume. The height outside, slanted height, we also know as a slant height, that's for area. So even though we've seen this exact same cone in 11.6, but we're now using the inside height because we're looking for volume. So inside, that's all over 3. Okay, so 3's cancel out, luckily, so we get pi times 16 or 16 pi. Again, if we were leaving this in pi form, that's our final answer, but we are not. So let's go ahead and round that off to 1 decimal. We get 50.2 units. Oh, sorry, not 2, 3.3 units cubed. All right, so let's look at our last shape here. We're looking at a sphere. One of the biggest things about spheres is we confuse the two formulas. So let's look at the two formulas, because I even had somebody today ask me, is this the right formula? For surface area, so for area, surface area, we use the formula 4 pi radius square. Now we use square because area is a two-dimensional measurement, so it's measuring at a two-dimensional rate, so it's length times width. But we're at three-dimensional, so we're doing length times width times height. That's why we use radius cubed, length times width times height here. These are all radius, radii, and radii right here. All right, so we put in our formula here. We got 4 pi, our radius in our practice problem is 7, so 7 cubed over 3. You go ahead and cube your 7, so make sure you do that. If you do it correctly, you should get 343. So we got 4 times pi times 343 over 3. Let's go ahead and multiply these two numbers on top. So times 4, we end up getting 1372 pi all over 3. Now this will be considered our exact form because you can't actually divide the 3. Sorry about that. You can't divide the 3 into the 1372. So you would leave it like that if it wanted the exact form. But we're going to go ahead and multiply 1372 times pi and then divide that by 3. If you do it correctly, you should get 1436.8. Again, units cubed. Let's try this practice one right here. So in your homework, it is going to give you an A part and a B part. So with the A, it's going to want you to set up the formula. And let me fix this. Set up the formula in terms of x and pi. So you're going to leave the equation as it is. Like as far as you're going to leave the problems, the parts they give you as they are. You're going to just set up your equation. So remember, our equation here is 4 pi radius cubed over 3. So we're going to substitute our radius in for the r here. So we got 4 pi parentheses 5x minus 0.5 cubed over 3. Now, as far as simplifying this is as simple as it can get. Now, we could expand this out, but it'll cause more of a mess than not. So we're done right there for the most part. We have it set up. We're good. Now, part B, I want you to actually go ahead and find the volume, knowing what this is now, knowing that the value of x is 0.25. So I'm going to substitute that in there. So we'll have 4 pi parentheses 5 times 0.25 minus 0.5, and that's all cubed over 3 right there. So 5 times 0.25 right there, that gives us 1.25, and then we subtract those. So in the parentheses, we got 4 pi parentheses 0.75 cubed right there, all over 3. And then just go ahead and simplify that. So we're going to expand this out. So we got 4 pi. Now I'm going to write it all out because I want you guys to, when you do this on your own, we get something similar. So let me do 0.5 times 0.75 times 0.75 right there. If you do it correctly in your calculator, you'll get this long decimal 421.875. Leave it like that. Okay, don't round to the very end. So now that I have that, because it is a terminal decimal since it doesn't keep going past that, just take this times the 4 times the 5. So times 4 times pi, you get another decimal. Oops, sorry, right there. You should get roughly around 5.3 and some other numbers, and then divide that by 3. So if you do it correctly, you should get roughly 1.8. You get 1.767, which rounds to 1.8. Again, this is in yards, so it would be yards cubed right there. All right, let's look at our last problem here. You're going to have about 3 or 4 of these problems right here where it's combining different figures to create one new figure. All right, so we had 3 different figures. So we have a cone, a cylinder, and a semicircle. So let's kind of write the equations for that. So for the cone, we should have pi radius squared times height divided by 3. For the cylinder, it should just be pi radius squared times height. And then for the semisphere, is 4 pi radius cubed over 3. That's the formula for the whole sphere, but we're doing half of that. So we're going to multiply that times 1/2 because we're halving it, and we'll adjust that here in a bit. So let's look at this before we start substituting anything else in. So our radius here is r, so there's nothing we can do about it. We already have r there. But look at this right here. Let's start with the cone. Since this is a 45, 45, 90-degree triangle, what's special about 45, 45, 90-degree triangle, specifically the 2 legs here, is they have the exact same value. So if my radius is r, what will be my height of this cone? Also r. So I'm going to substitute an r in for that h. So when I do so, I'm going to be getting pi radius cube because I got 3 r's now, all over 3. Same thing over here. They tell us that the height of my cylinder here is 2r. So I'm going to substitute a 2r for that h. So I get pi 2r to the third. So multiply the 2 times r squared. You get 2r, and then r times r squared, r to the third. Now let's look at our last one. The only thing that matters is the radius. We have the radius already, but like we said, we're doing a semisphere, so it's half a sphere. So we got a half what we already have. So that becomes 4 pi radius cubed over 6. Instead of over 3 is over 6, because we are now halving what we originally had. All right, so this is as simplified this particular formula we'll get. We can't go past that because we're combining 3 different ones, and that's the only relation all 3 have. So they tell us that the value of r is 5. So let's go ahead and substitute that in here. So we got pi 5 to the third over 3 plus pi 2 times 5 to the third plus 4 pi times 5 cubed over 6. All right, let's simplify this in terms of pi. Let's get as simple as we get before we actually start rounding this. So 5 times 5 times 5 gives us 125 pi over 3. Plus here, we got 5 to the third, which is just 125, then times 2 gives us 250 pi. Plus, and here, again, pi to the third is 125, but then times 4 gives us 500 pi over 6. All right, so this is what we get now. So we got 125 pi divided by 3. If you do it right, you should get roughly 130.89. I'm going to go ahead and do 0.9. I'll round it right here. All right, and then we got 250 pi. That gives us 785.4. And then I got the 500 pi divided by 6 on this one. Do it right, you should get 261.8. So I got 261.8 plus my 785.4 plus my 130.9. That gives me, if you do it correctly, roughly 1,178.1. Again, this is in inches, so it'll be inches cubed. And that's the volume for all 3 figures. All right, hopefully that helps y'all. Bye.